So this just happened. I am with a friend in a cabin, with my boyfriend, seeing our goddaughter. She was born back in March, but due to the pandemic, we have just been able to visit them. But that's besides the point. I was out back with their dog Jojo, who is a pit bull, and, by the way, the sweetest dog I have ever met. We were playing fetch, and about 30 minutes before I actually saw anything, I had this odor hit my nostrils. Rotting flesh. I didn't worry too much because we were pretty high up in the mountains. I thought maybe it had just been a dead deer from the way up on the hills, and the smell was just now getting to me. So, I continued to play with Jojo, and once he was content, chewing his stick, I sat down on a log and just enjoyed the sound of my music and the stars above. I could still smell the rotting scent, but I brushed it off. So 5 minutes go by, and I get this really odd feeling of being watched. Jojo, his ears perk up, and he looks around like he's heard something. Now, I did have my headphones on, listening to some music, so I didn't really hear much. But I looked around to one of the trees, and the white flash went quickly. I get up, called Jojo over to my side, like the big coward he is, rushed to me, tail between his legs. We stood there for a second, and the smell at this point was so strong, I wanted to gag. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then it peeled at me from behind the trees. I only had to look at it for about 4 seconds before I ran the hell away. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, skinny, huge, and black eyes, kind of long blonde hair too. I'm telling you now, I had never been so scared in my life. I was about 20 or so feet away from the porch, and I floored Jojo in tow, and we did not look back. We get into the house, and I told everybody what happened. My boyfriend thinks I was just saying things, and, of course, so did my friends. But they did say they had never seen Jojo so spooked, and she is now hiding under my goddaughter crib. I'm not a joke as I'm writing all this. We had just heard a scream of a man. We are the one in at least a 30-mile radius. So please, help me out here. I don't know much about these kinds of things other than the basic stuff. I'm still shaking. I'm 22 now, and this was back when I was 17, when I was still a junior in high school. One night, I had snuck out of my house without my parents knowing. I live in the basement level, so it's just a matter of climbing up on my table and sneaking out the floor window. It was about 12:30 at night, and I was heading over to my girlfriend's house, which is about 15 minutes away. A nice lengthy walk through kind of a parky, woodsy area, and then into another neighborhood. We were going to be teenagers. I'll leave your imagination up to that. Without making this email too vulgar, I climb up out of my window, and I'm on the road. And because it's 12:30 at night, it's just me. Because of the neighborhood I'm in, it's pretty dead. I mean, there's practically no traffic around at all. Nothing. And it's pretty quiet out too. Now, I don't remember hearing any crickets, but that could just be because it was one of those quieter nights. I don't know. I'm not sure if that has really anything to do with it, but either way. So I'm walking, and I get past the park area where it's a lot woodsier. To my left is this large open park. Back beyond the park is this thick wooded area, and there's trees all throughout the park, all throughout the woods, and even up by the sidewalk where I'm walking. If I were to look to my right, directly to the right of me is a street, and then beyond that is more neighborhood. Now I had to cross all the way around this park to get to the adjacent neighborhood, which is where my girlfriend's house was. Like I said, roughly 15 minutes away from my house, walking distance. So as I'm walking, I get right up to that park area, and I notice around me again that there's nobody around, except the streetlights are on, and maybe a car or two buzz by, but nothing really. And I get this strange feeling that somebody's looking at me. So I start to look around and figured maybe someone's just sitting in their car watching this 17-year-old boy with a backpack on walk by. But I looked and I didn't see anybody in their car. And actually, there weren't many cars around either. A few parked here and there, but nothing. So I kind of just shrugged off the feeling and kept walking. Then, directly off to my left, movement catches my eye. So I look over, and I see this large, tall black shape dart quickly from tree to tree. But this is way back, beyond the park. Easily probably 100 or so feet back. But it was large enough that it caught my attention. I figured it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, and maybe just the time of night and whatnot. I keep walking, and I get about to the end where the park is, at least the corner where I have to turn to the left to get into the adjacent neighborhood where my girlfriend lives. And out of the corner of my eye, just like before, there's no mistaking. I see movement, and this movement is this tall, large, black human shape, except it's running towards me. Full speed, like some sort of drugged homeless maniac. And as I go to look, I could see it sprinting towards me. Except it looked more like an animal than anything else, at least from what I saw. The shape was shaped like a human, but it had hair, at least that I could see. And so I just dropped my backpack and I started running as fast as I could, because I was loosely holding it on my shoulders. I made it to my girlfriend's house in double time, and never once looked back to see if I was still being followed. I don't think I was, because as soon as I ran into the neighborhood, I didn't hear it following behind me. But then again, I never heard its footsteps actually. My girlfriend thought it was awfully strange how panicked and out of breath I was, but I explained to her that some maniac meth head tried to rush me in the park. She was concerned, but ultimately glad I was okay. Although, I don't think it was a maniac meth head, or anything like that, or even a homeless person. Whoever it was freakishly tall, and covered in hair. That much I did see, with the minimal lighting. What it was, or who it was, I don't know, but it freaked and creeped me out. The following account is 100% truthful, and took place at 3 in the morning, on October 31st, 2020. My friends and I always go on walks together past midnight. In the woods, along the roads, anything. We usually have 4 people, but this time, Ben, the guy whose house we were staying at, could have had 6 people over. So, the 6 of us walked along the road to this Verizon tower on this hill. The stars look very nice up there at night, so we always do it. We get about halfway up the hill, and we're kind of feeling uneasy. It's a full moon on Halloween night, after all. I mean, you can only imagine. Nick, the oldest and most stoic out of all of us, the one who never jokes or believes in the paranormal or anything, points his flashlight ahead on the trail. What is that? He also rarely swears, so this was another attention-grabbing thing. We all stop and look ahead. About 20 paces ahead of us, there it was. 8 feet tall, snow white, a skin and bone, lanky, bipedal thing within a stone's throw. 6 people all saw this at the same time. It takes off into the woods at superhuman speed. We stop and are silent for a moment. We immediately start asking if everybody saw it, and, of course, everybody did. Now we argue and cuss, and I try my hardest to convince the others to turn back and forget it. But fearless Ben, who doesn't believe in anything, begs to push on. We do. Now, I've cut down a lot of trees in my day, so I know what it sounds like when one falls. On the continuation of our voyage, less than a minute later, a tree slams to the ground on the side of the trail. It didn't fall. It was pulled down with force. We stop and argue. We push on. A minute after that, we hear a rustling and a loud, painful chirp from a bird. We make it to the tower and look around. The top of the hill is mostly devoid of trees, so we look down the path where it ran. Ben is still trying to convince us that he is not afraid. We decide to run the half-mile back down to his house. We get there, and now Ben starts crying. This is a guy who has never ever believed in anything his entire life. But he, out of everybody, saw something up there. We all did. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes. We've gone back up there, but haven't seen anything since. And I've done a lot of research into it. I have no doubt in my mind what we saw was a Wendigo. First off, I'm going to say that I've been somewhat interested in this kind of stuff for quite some time, but I've always been pretty skeptical of most paranormal things, taking every story like this I hear with a grain of salt. Also, I have taken multiple camping trips to the Utah deserts, and this is the first time anything like this has happened to me. Yesterday, me and my 3 brothers went on a short one-night camping trip to the lava tubes near Fillmore, Utah, but pretty much in the middle of nowhere in the desert. We had a good evening hanging out and talking before watching the stars, a movie, and going to bed. We brought a 4-man tent and set up our campsite far from the dirt road. Even though we were the only people there, my brothers all fell asleep pretty quickly, though for some reason, I could not. So, I just listened to the coyotes howling in the distance for about an hour and a half. By now, it's about 12:30 or 1 a.m., and I'm still awake. Suddenly, I get this odd feeling, like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, and my gut sank at the same time. That's when I hear it. Someone or something was walking toward our campsite. At first, I thought it was just a coyote, but it sounded heavy, and its footsteps sounded bipedal. I could hear its feet sliding through the grass and shifting the stones on the ground as it was getting closer and closer to us, until the footsteps sounded like it was right beside our tent. I couldn't see it from where I was. Then, I heard a shrill, hollow, unearthly whistle coming from just outside the tent. I went stiff. My heart was racing. It sounded so unnatural and alien that I did not know how to react. I was just terrified. Finally, after a long minute of silence, I heard it slowly walk away. The same heavy footsteps until I could not hear it anymore. I was more scared than I have ever been in my life last night. I was too scared to take a peek outside the tent, but now I wish I kind of would have. I stayed awake for another hour, wondering if I should wake my brothers or not, but decided against it and tried to sleep. This morning, before we packed up and left, I told them what I had heard, but none of them really believed me until we made it back home and my dad told us something really unsettling. He said this, that last night, around 12:30, he felt super worried about us, and he didn't know why. He told us that we had this feeling like we were in severe danger, and that he needed to pray for our protection, which he did immediately. Once my brothers heard him say that, they both took my story a little more seriously, but they are still skeptical, as am I. Look, I don't know what I heard last night, but I do know I heard something. If anybody has any ideas, please, I'd love to hear them. So, this is the first time that I've ever actually shared this story, and I often listen at night for bedtime stories. I consider this 100% true, and it takes place in Cincinnati, Ohio, specifically Claremont County. So we'll clear out some initial details. I'm a female, I'm 31 years young now, and this happened back in 2006. So at the time, I was 17, going on 18. My boyfriend, we will call M, my friend, who we will call A, and her boyfriend, now husband, we will call N, are the ones involved in this unexplained event. So, for some background info first, there's this abandoned cabin in the middle of the woods, and you can only get to it by walking roughly a mile one way. There are abandoned cars, an ambulance, some tractors, and other random vehicles like a short school bus. They're all covered in gunshots. There is not even a path to drive a vehicle back there. If there was, we would be walking a mile one way to get there. So, We're not sure how they even got there, or how long they've ever been there. My boyfriend and I had gone with 2 other friends previous to our encounter, and it was creepy, but not compared to what had happened when we went with A and N. So, on our previous trip, we went with our friends, T and J. T and myself went upstairs and had a Ouija board. We asked some random stupid questions. I can't even remember. What I do remember is it spelled out hooey, like H-O-O-E-Y. We said goodbye on the board, and I was looking around the upstairs, which was really just an attic. We found massive kids' socks in the wall. It was really random and weird. We got startled when an alarm clock began ticking. It would stop, so I smashed it to pieces, and that was that. We walked downstairs where the boys were and made our way back outside. We found a creepy old well that was covered up. Then, all of a sudden, we heard that alarm clock ticking again, but I know I had broken it, so that kind of spooked us, but nothing major. We saw an outdoor cellar we went in, and there was a Girl Scout's boot with a bone inside the shoe. So I was like, okay, we're done for the day. Let's go. So my boyfriend and myself were telling A and N about this cabin and what happened when T and J came with us. So we decided we were going to go later that day. So the day this encounter happened, M, N, A, and myself went to the lake, packed a cooler with the food and crap, and spent probably 5 or so hours at the lake, ate, and just hung out. We left the lake and stopped at A and N's house, dropped the cooler off, which was in the trunk of the car. This is important for later in the story. After getting everything out of the trunk from our lake trip, we headed to my boyfriend's parents' house, where we parked the car and began our hour walk. We had flashlights, and that was it. The walk there was pretty uneventful. We had to walk through 2 huge drainage tunnels just to get to this cabin. I mean, it was back there. So we make it there, and it wasn't dark out, but it seemed different this time. And I'm not really sure how to explain it. But it was just different, but we did come later in the day than previously. So I was like, okay, whatever. Just like last time, when we get inside, A and myself was going to go upstairs. I wanted to show her the socks on the wall, and I also wanted to check on the clock that I broke last visit, that I heard ticking outside previously. I'm sure you remember. As we start to go up the stairs, there was this big loud crash, like something was thrown or knocked over. A gets freaked out, and then out of nowhere, she books it outside back down to the creek, yelling at M and N and myself to come on. I go chasing after her, and she's now in tears, having a full-blown panic attack, saying something. Finally, I get that she saw someone looking in at us in the window. We tell the guys, and literally nobody is around. Only the 4 of us. Since she's so distraught, we decide to go ahead and leave. So we're walking back down to the creek bed, heading back the same way we came, which is the only way there. M and N are kicking over these huge rocks. We stop and realize there are huge rocks, I'd say boulders, standing right up in a line the entire way down the creek bed. They couldn't have been there not even 20 minutes prior, because we would have noticed them as we were now. So this seriously freaked all of us out. This is not normal, and it was not natural. We pick up the pace and start to haul butt out of there. We make it to the first drainage tunnel and turn on our flashlights. Literally, none of them will even turn on. 4 flashlights that worked perfectly fine on the way there. Now, none of them work? What's happening? So, 30 minutes later, we're back at my boyfriend's parents' house, where A and N is parked. A gets in the car because, at this point, she's ready to go home and nope out of here. Forget this event ever happened. The rest of us are still outside the car. A suddenly gets out of the car, screaming and jumping up and down, flying around. She is covered in ants. We are like, what the actual hell is going on? So we look, and they're coming from the back seat and from the trunk. N opens the trunk of his car, and laying in the trunk is this huge, rusty, extremely old wool sock covered in ants. Now, remember what I said earlier in the story? We had been in all out of the trunk all day, and there was nothing in the trunk when we left the house from dropping off the cooler. Now, there is a wool sock covered in ants that covered their car. This was too much for any of us to even wrap around our heads. Needless to say, we've never been back there, and I personally will never go back. So, it turns out, the man who used to live in that cabin was named Hubert, and he was often called Huey. My boyfriend had actually been to the cabin once before I ever went, and he found these journals there. The man was an alleged child molester. His journals went into detail about his urges, etc. I'm not going to go into that much detail, but again, this story is totally true, and it was honestly the one and only time I've ever encountered something like this. I will never go back to that cabin. Ever. Even to this day, talking about it right now, I have goosebumps. I can't explain what happened. I have no idea what I saw that scared her so badly in the window. But I do know this. Boulders do not stand straight up on their own in a line, and nobody could have done it so fast to scare us. Nobody could have messed with our flashlights, and nobody could have put that old, dirty, ant-infested wool sock in A&N's car trunk. If you are ever wandering through the woods and come across a random cabin, just leave it. You never know who lived there, what they did, and who or what might still be there. Unfortunately, I learned that the very hard and unsettling way. So, for starters, this was back in 2008, and I was leaving town headed east. At this time, I lived with my girlfriend out in Portland, Oregon, and I was heading east on Highway 84. This highway heads east and runs along what's called the Columbia Gorge, which separates Oregon and Washington state by a beautiful large river. It is easily one of the most gorgeous places to live, but cell phone coverage is pretty crappy, even nowadays. And right before I actually got on 84, I pulled off on one of the last, not pullouts, but it was like a ramp that led to a small road where there's kind of a parking lot, and there's a lot of trees all around. I wouldn't say forest, it was just an area where there was a lot of heavier woods, but it was right off the highway. So I take this off-ramp, pull off into this small parking lot, because I needed to call my girlfriend, and even though this wasn't in an area where cell phone service was bad, I could not get a call to go through. So I figured I would pull over, make a phone call, and get back on the road. No problems, right? Well, it wasn't that simple. So I pull over, and of course nobody is around, so I'm the only real witness here. I get out of the car to get some fresh air, pull up my old flip phone, like we had in 2008, because iPhones had just started to come out, and I start talking to my girlfriend. For the life of me, I can't quite remember what the conversation was about, but it's pretty irrelevant to the story. We're lost in conversation, talking about whatever it is we were talking about at the time, and I see something moving directly ahead of me in the woods. Or the trees, whatever you call it. And as I'm looking, I'm still in conversation. I see this hand kind of jet up and pull the branch down, and staring at me is this weird, freaky-looking face that I literally paused halfway into speaking a sentence to my girlfriend. And she's like, "Hello, are you still there?" And I was so shocked I couldn't even finish what I was saying. I'll try and describe the face for you as best as I can, but it's so weird, I don't even know what it could have been. Being up here in the Northwest, I've heard of Bigfoot, and even things like werewolves, I guess, but it didn't really look like either, and it did not match any descriptions of that of a bear either. Imagine elongated like a horse's face, but not that extreme. And its eyes were very sunken into its skull, but unlike a horse, they were not on the side of its head. They were forward-facing, and it kind of had a nose, kind of half-human, half-slits. It was more the lower part of the face and mouth that kind of drooped down. The skin appeared to be all black, and there was this thick, dark brown hair that was very wiry-looking, all around its head, and its skull, it seemed to be a little bit pointed, upwards. I didn't see any ears or anything else, but it had large gorilla-like hands. That much I do remember. As it was staring at me, I'll never forget what it did next. It kind of slowly lifted up its lips and smirked at me in some horrifying way. Then it kind of quickly ducked down and disappeared. All the while, I was still frozen on the phone with my girlfriend, not sure exactly what I should say. I just told her I needed to go, and I kind of just sat there for a moment, trying to process and render what I had just seen. What was it? I just got in the car and drove to where I was supposed to go, and I called my girlfriend later on that night, and was like, hey, I needed to tell you something. I saw something earlier while we were on the phone, and I'm not quite sure what it is. I was actually really distraught about the whole thing, but she's so awesome. She helped me look it up and find out what it could have been. Her first thought was that it was a Bigfoot, and she was pretty adamant that they don't exist, since she didn't believe in that kind of stuff, but she kept asking me from pictures, is this what you saw? Is this what you saw? And yeah, some of them looked similar, but not quite what I had seen. What I saw looked different. It didn't look like a man or it didn't look like an ape. It looked like something else entirely. I do remember too it had kind of glowing cat eyes. Maybe glowing is not the right word, but very bioluminescent in a way. Like they were glowing but not emitting a light, if that makes sense. The best description I can find that fits is if you go into or under a dark light, where certain colors and things that are like neon really brighten up, but they're not emitting light. That's kind of this yellow eyes that I saw. They were almost captivating, like you could get stuck in a trance staring into them. That whole encounter has stuck with me ever since and has been very disturbing, to say the least. And no, even all these years later, I still have no clue what it is I saw. On the morning of March 20th, 2021, I saw a post stating that the Boeing X-37B orbital test vehicle, some kind of prototype autonomous spaceplane the U.S. Air Force is working on, would be visible in the night sky over in the northern United States and southern Canada. I've never really been that interested in space, to be honest, but I do enjoy stargazing from time to time, and it was a clear night. So, I decided to head out into the hills to try and catch a glimpse of the spacecraft. I tried to convince my boyfriend to come with me, but he was too busy playing Fortnite, or whatever shooter game designed for 12-year-olds that 20-somethings are obsessed with nowadays. I threw an old lawn chair into the back of my new Toyota Tacoma, driving 15 minutes outside of town, where I knew there was a lookout. It was at the end of a long, dead-end dirt road that went up the backside of a ski hill and came out into a large open area that overlooked part of the resort, but more importantly, gave an incredible view of the stars above. I was hoping that nobody else would be up there, since it was the closest thing we had to a lover's lane, where teenagers would go do God knows what in their parents' car. Fortunately, my prayers seemed to be answered that night, as that little parking area was completely deserted. I set up my lawn chair on the grass a few feet away from my truck and gazed up at the beautiful night sky. Even with the almost full moon lighting up the night, there was an incredible amount of stars visible. It was almost overwhelming, especially considering I really had no idea what I was even looking for. I was assuming that I wouldn't actually be able to see the spacecraft itself, and that it would just be some moving lights in the sky, but I didn't know for sure. Every plane passing overhead gave me a little rush, until I realized what it was. Finally, 8:45 p.m. rolls around, exactly when Reddit said it would appear. And there, it was coming over the horizon from the west. This glowing orb of light moving quickly across the night sky. It had a faint ring around it, kind of like the full moon often gets on a clear night. And I knew right away it had to be the spacecraft. I tried to snap a few pictures, but, of course, phone cameras can never capture the true beauty of the night. 5 minutes goes by and it had disappeared off to the east, and I was getting cold. I decided to head home and packed up my chair, got back into my truck. A funny thing about the new Toyota Tacoma is that they come with a GoPro mounted on the windshield, just to the right of the rearview mirror. I guess Toyota finally noticed these trucks are almost exclusively purchased by outdoor adventure seekers. I'm no exception to that, and sometimes like to record footage of my drives on scenic backroads on my way to and from a mountain biking trail, just to add to the video. Oftentimes, this meant I'd get home and leave the camera on my windshield. Well, this time apparently was no exception, because as I got back in the truck, I noticed the camera was sitting there next to my mirror, and I laughed to myself that I had done it again. Then, I noticed something strange. The camera was on, and the little red recording light was blinking. Normally, if I left my GoPro in the truck, or even unattended somewhere in the house, the battery would just die, and I definitely did not turn the camera on. So this was really weird. I was curious, though, as to whether or not the camera picked up anything, since it was a rather bright night out, and my truck was pointed in roughly the right direction, that it might have picked up the spacecraft coming over the horizon. I pulled up my GoPro app on my phone to have a look at the footage, and was expecting to see some of the drive there, but the video started with the truck already parked at the lookout. I wasn't in the shot sitting in my lawn chair, so it was pretty much just a shot of the sky. I saw briefly what I believed to be the spacecraft in the corner of the video, but it was hard to tell on such a small screen, with terrible video quality due to low lighting conditions. I was about to turn the video off when I noticed movement off to the right. This large dark shape that I could not quite make out was moving towards the truck. As it got closer, I could see it more clearly, as it was now above the horizon on video, and so it was silhouetted against the bright night sky. It was a huge creature that must have walked on two legs based on its height. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. I couldn't tell if it had horns or ears protruding from its head, but it definitely had something on top. It turned its head, and I caught a flash of red in its eyes as it did so. Then it disappeared from the video. That was all I could take. I let out a scream, threw my phone into the passenger seat, and almost in tears started the truck, peeling out down the dirt road, sending gravel everywhere as I went. I had been sitting out there mere feet away from this monster, without even knowing it was there. I kept expecting to leap out of the trees any second and flip my truck over with its massive arms or something, but it didn't. Every little shadow my headlights cast on the trees made me jump, thinking it was this thing. I just couldn't get over the image of its silhouette out of my mind. I made it to the main road and flew back towards town, doing well above the speed limit. When I got back to the house, my heart felt like I was going to explode. My boyfriend, though, was obviously quite concerned when he saw me walk into the house, in tears, asked me what was wrong. I could barely string together a sentence, and told him to go have a look at the video. I handed him my GoPro and my phone. He tried to get it to work, but couldn't. He pulls out the SD card and puts it into his laptop. While he was doing that, I calmed down enough to somewhat describe what had happened. To my dismay, when he tried to pull up the video, the footage was corrupted. Some skiing footage from winter still left on that card was fine, but the one clip I needed was gone. My boyfriend said it was probably just a bear, since they've been known to walk on their hind legs, and even showed me several videos of bears doing that. Even that's not exactly a comforting thought, but unfortunately, I don't think it was a bear. All the videos he showed me of bears walking on two legs looked almost comical, since they really do look more human than anything else. The way they move is rather clumsy, in stark contrast to the very smooth and methodical movements of the thing I had seen. The silhouette also didn't look the same, but without the video footage to directly compare, and only my panicked memory to go on, who knows what it was.